So, with that, I think we will get started. In another of our great string of recent guests, our guest today is Miguel Rosales. He is president and principal designer of Rosales and Partners and has over 25 years of experience as lead designer for major infrastructure projects across the US and abroad. Prior to forming his firm, Mr. Rosales served as lead architect and urban designer for the Leonard P. Zakim Bunker Hill Bridge, and he collaborated with the great Swiss bridge designer Christian Menn. Mr. Rosales helped to develop the innovative cable-stayed bridge and guide it through a complex public participation process, which I can confirm. It was an incredibly complex process, as almost any large civic enterprise in Boston inevitably is. Mr. Rosales is recognized internationally as an expert on bridge aesthetics and design. He has received grants from the NEA, from the American Institute of Architects and the American Architecture Foundation, and MIT to research bridge and infrastructure design, and is the recipient of several awards, including the 1993 Young Architects Design Award from Progressive Architecture magazine. His current major US bridge projects include the North Washington Street Bridge in Boston, the Longfellow Bridge rehabilitation in Boston, which is a major enterprise, which we'll want to talk about, the Esplanade Pedestrian Bridge in Boston, and the North Coast Harbor Pedestrian Bridge in Cleveland, Ohio, as well as the Trinity River Vision Bridges in Fort Worth, Texas. So we'll have a lot to talk about. Please join me in welcoming Miguel Rosales. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I used to be a student here at Northeastern. I used to come and take engineering classes some years back, and it brings nice memories to come back here. My background is basically in architecture and urban design, but many years ago I decided to focus only on bridges. And I had to, do a lot of studies and research to be able to do that. Because if you study architecture only, you're not able to do good bridge design. You really need to know about engineering also. So that's, one of the factors that happened in my career. And, I debated if I should show you projects that are finished or projects that are going to be about the future. And I thought maybe I'll show you something about the future, because then you will understand more how the process was, to get into these projects. And I'm very busy right now along the Charles River and the Esplanade because we have funding. And the governor in Massachusetts decided to do an additional funding, and many of the bridges on the river are being either changed or renovated. And we are also adding new bridges, which is quite exciting because for 50 years there was nothing happening, and the Longfellow Bridge was almost falling down, as you remember. So now it's a very good time to do bridges in Boston. And these are some of the bridges I'm going to talk to you about. And they start from the Harbor Bridge all the way to the North Washington Street Bridge, which is at the delta of the Charles River. And that's the last bridge that you see where you can see the harbor. And that one is next to the second bridge. So let's start first with the Harbor Bridge, which many people call it the MIT Bridge or the Mass Avenue Bridge. And part of that is because I don't think it has a very strong personality. It's a very low structure. But luckily, we were able to win a competition to do a lighting for the structure, and this is all a private funding. And it's a donor that's going to stay anonymous, and they're going to provide, I would say, about $3 million to, to do a new lighting for the project. And the Harbor Bridge is, very low-key. But one of the things that is important about the bridge is the granite piers. These are historic. This is the oldest bridge actually in the Charles River, one of the oldest. And we decided to highlight the structure from underneath. That was one of the things that we wanted to do. And we added these little blue lights, which will be part of the structure that will be supporting the bridge in itself. And we always feel like it's important to highlight different structural elements of a bridge when you light it. And this is one of the ways that we thought we could do it. And this is another view, from the side. But the most interesting part of the bridge, actually are the smooths. And I don't know if you have read about it, but it's a dimensional system that was created by MIT students. And it refers to Mr. Smooth, which is 5 feet 7 inches. So every year, the students come and they mark these crossings, 10 smooths, 20 smooths, 30 smooths. So I took that design, that thing, and I will make all the lights align with that. So at night, when you walk from the back bay to MIT, you will see the smooths illuminated. And they will also turn on and off in order. So for example, at the beginning of the afternoon, you will start with 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, until you go all the way to MIT, and then they will return back. So there will be some kind of movement there. And also, we're going to move all the light poles to the same system. So the whole bridge becomes like a dimensional, like a scale, and you're able to see that. And we felt like that was the most famous thing about the bridge, and then why not highlight that? And some parts of the bridge are kind of forgotten because it goes over Storo Drive, and we're going to also illuminate that. So that will be, part of the system, will be from the beginning of the bridge to the end of the bridge. And you can see here some views, and I think that the reflection is going to be quite beautiful because you'll be able to see the bridge reflected in the water, and hopefully this bridge will join, the other bridges that are going to be light in the future, the Longfellow and, already the Second Bridge as an important structure here in Boston. Now I'm going to show you a different one. This one is going to be the first bridge that's going to be ADA accessible from Beacon Hill, from Charles Circle, to the Esplanade. And all the bridges over Storo Drive, if you remember, they are not very inspiring. They're always very utilitarian. You have like beams across with columns. And this is going to be the first time that we're going to have an arch, which is, quite exciting to have an arch over Storo Drive because it's very close to the Longfellow Bridge. And we wanted to get inspiration from the Longfellow Bridge, but make it new. So this is a very light, contemporary structure. It's a very long span. It's about 250 feet. And the members are very thin because we want to have the transparency of the, people coming from one side to the other. This is another view, and you can see the Longfellow in the back. And we're actually using the same curvature as the Longfellow, but in a modern way. And the bridge is very long because, it's ADA, so you have to go 5%, and then you have to go through the Esplanade. So all the connection in the park is going to be like kind of walking, kind of floating in the Esplanade. And we try to use the same design, the same, steel system throughout. So it's very consistent because many times, you have the main bridge and then the approaches are not consistent with each other. So this is a design that will be completely uniform, and it will be illuminated. And I've been told that for the 4th of July, the railing is going to go red, white, and blue. So you should try it, It should be finished in about a year and a half. It's actually, part of it's already in construction. And this bridge cost $12.5 million. This is another view from the side. So, once you come from under the Longfellow, you'll be able to see it. And if you go right now to the side, there is an existing bridge, but it's very narrow. It's only 7 feet. And people get always very crowded because, you get a lot of bikers. This one is going to be 14 feet. So it's going to be the double of the size. So it will be, much more capacity. And this is a view from above. Of course, this was added as part of the Longfellow Bridge. And the Longfellow Bridge is a much bigger project. It's about, at this moment, I think it's $300 million for that one, for the renovation. But I think this bridge is going to have as much impact as the Longfellow in terms of mobility and in terms of making all the different connections, of the different areas. This is from the side. One nice thing about the existing bridge, though, is that when you come at the end and you go to the water and you turn the ramp, there is a nice overlook area, and many people take photos there. So I decided to keep that part of that bridge. So at the very end, we're going to have a very nice curve overlook, and when you come into that point, you'll have a beautiful view of the river and also of the other bridge. but it will be much bigger, so people will not get crowded anymore. And then we're also going to have stairs coming down, so you'll be able to take the stairs if you don't want to take the ramps, because the ramps are quite long. So that's always important, that a bridge should have functionality, that being efficient, but also should have some beauty and context integration. And I think this bridge achieves that. The railing is very thin, so we just want to make it very, very transparent. This is from below. And the shape is interesting. It's like kind of like an orange peel. It goes small and then wide at the top and then small again. And that's because I didn't want to impact the esplanade very much. So it comes really to a very small point, on the park side. Because as you know, the esplanade is a landmark park. It's protected by the Landmarks Commission, and any intervention has to be approved, and it's kind of hard to get the approval. It's a view from the side. Now we come to the Longfellow Bridge. The Longfellow Bridge is very famous because of the towers, of course, and also because it's one of the tallest structures, on the river, and it had always had a European appearance to it. It was inspired by European bridges, like in Budapest or in Vienna. And for a long time it was abandoned. And about 9 years ago, we were hired to start to work on the renovation. And it's something that was very interesting to me because I really like the bridge, and it's not something that I normally do because I usually work on new structures, not this one. But this one is so special that I thought it would be a good design to challenge to do that. And it will be light at night, and I will give it a completely different appearance. And one thing that we did a lot is to modernize the structure inside. So everything inside is going to be reinforced. So for seismic and for any other condition, it will be much stronger. But in the outside, it has to be completely protected. Actually, I was not able even to put a light on the granite. So everything has to be controlled. Because of the historic nature of the structure. And one thing that was done too was that the sidewalks would be much wider. When you cross right now, on one side is very narrow. They're going to go from about 8.5 feet to actually 12 feet on the other side. And one of the lanes of the cars had been eliminated, and that allows you to make wider sidewalks, which is something that was very popular when the design was being developed. So coming into Boston, there's going to be 2 lanes, and going into Cambridge, there's going to be only 1 lane. And then you will have a very wide sidewalk. We don't really know why coming into Boston is more busy than going into Cambridge, but that's what happens. And during construction, a lot of things need to happen. This is the wide sidewalk on the other side. One of the things that's going to happen is the train is going to move. We have to move the train to one side. And the center, where the train is right now, the rail line, will be repaired. And that hasn't happened yet. The train is still in the same location, but in the next year or so, the train is going to move, and that's going to be, quite a challenge to do that. One other thing that I did is that you see the lighting here. The lighting is actually a historic lighting, but it's basically inspired on the catenaries, of 1908 when the bridge opened. So I tried to take something from the past and put it into the future. And all this lighting will be LEDs. And these lights never existed because when the bridge was open, they only had low lights. There was no requirement. Now they had to be tall, and I thought, let's try to use the catenary of the trains from the past. And you can see here from, at night. The towers are going to be lit from the inside. So right now they are completely dark at night, but in the future they're going to look like a lighthouse, and they will glow. And that's one of the things that make the name of the bridge the Salt and Pepper Towers, and I think having the lighting inside is going to be quite interesting. Now we go further down the river. This is next to the Museum of Science. This area has always been compromised since the Museum of Science was built because they put a garage right on the river. And you're not able to cross there. And you have to go all around, when you are running, for example, and you can never stay on the water. So we did these 2 bridges that are going to allow people to stay on the water side. and they are located in those positions. And it's very tricky to put a bridge there because it's protected for one thing from the historic point of view, and there is not a lot of space. It's very tight, so it was hard to find a way to support it. And we were not allowed to touch any of the buildings of the museum. So, sometimes you can attach a structure to a building and, that will help you, but in this case, that was not possible. So it had to be independent. So when we do pedestrian bridges, we always like to do the bridges to go in the direction where the people want to go. So if they want to turn, then we turn the structure. And in this case, a lot of people are going to come from Cambridge and they will turn, go in the direction on the other side, and then when you come to the canal, near the other museum, they will turn in the other direction. So that's why both of them are curved. The first one looks like this, and we only found a little space between these two buildings to support this tower. And, the cables are in the back, and the view is towards the other side. So, I was trying to see how could you make the parking garage look better. And then, you're going to have this fan of cables kind of pushing it a little bit back. And, once you are in this area, the area actually is very nice, but you cannot get there right now. So, the museum is completely turned its back to the river. But with these bridges, you will be able to enjoy that view, and it's a very beautiful view because you can see the Longfellow and you can see, the whole downtown. And this is when you're coming, from the side, and you can see here how it has to kind of bend around it. And this is once you are on the other location. And of course, we think that it should be lit. This is it's a steel structure, and because it's curved, you're able to only support it from one side. If the bridge was straight and you put only cables on one side, it would fall down. But when it's curved, you create like a ring, and it's more stable in itself. And that's why, that's possible to be done. This is the other one, which is also curved, but that's going in the other direction. This one has to open, and it opens like that. And in this case, it's a bascule structure, but because I want it to be very light, it's open with a hydraulic cylinder, which is unusual. It will be the first bridge in the US that you'll be able to do that. And mainly of that is because the loads are not very big and it's a small structure. And that means that you don't have a counterweight. So it's very light, and this cylinder will just push down and will raise it up. So if you see it from the other side, it's like that, and that's open. So when it's open, it's actually very nice because it has a curve and it looks like a wing. And in this location, it's protected the area. So again, we always try to make it very transparent, and very, very light. And this one is at night, and it's actually a very nice view because the Bunker Hill Monument is lit. It was illuminated, some years back, and this is riding axis. So if you are looking at that way, you can go and see all the way to Charlestown, and it's all you have 3 different layers of bridges. That's when it's open. And of course, we come to the second bridge, and the second bridge is how I started to be involved in bridge design, and it's something that changed my life completely. It was very controversial, and it was very difficult to keep a design that would work, and there were so many people involved in it. But I think the result is very successful, and it created a new image for that area and also make Boston look more avant-garde. Before that, there was never a cable structure in New England or anywhere in Boston, and that really transformed, the area, and it has influenced me, from the very beginning. And, one of the things that we cared a lot was the lighting of the structure, and, some years back, the lights were turned off, and I was very upset, so I really pushed to turn them back. And, recently the DOT, the Mass DOT hired me again to be able to change the colors in the lighting. And now we have more state-of-the-art lighting for the second bridge, and that's something that people really like. And of course, this bridge is the major entrance into the city, and also it's very car-oriented. So it's a very very big scale. they're about 300 feet tall, the tower, so you can see it, from a very long distance. And these are some views with the new lighting. And the last project I'm going to show you, which, at the end, this one is going on right now. This one is the replacement of the North Washington Street Bridge. And we wanted to make a structure that would not compete with the Second Bridge, but somehow relate a little bit to it, and actually make the new bridge like an overlook to the harbor and the Second Bridge. So we have this central portion, which will have plants. And it will be the first time in Boston that we have plants on the bridge. You never did that. And the idea is to try to see if you can extend the greenway into the bridge and make it completely separate the pedestrians from the cars. So on one side, we're going to have a planted median and an overlook with trees, and then they will be very different from the cars. And it will be by far the best bridge for bikers and pedestrians in Boston. Probably the best bridge for that in the United States, because 40% of the structure is going to be dedicated only for pedestrians and bikers, which is very unusual. Usually you have 10% of the structure. But it's such a very nice view that we felt that was, worth it to do. So what I did is took the towers of the Second Bridge and I inversed them. And that's how the bridge is supported. So it has something that reminds you of the Second Bridge, but it's not the same. And we didn't want to do a cable structure because I think that would be more like a copy. So, this is a structure supported from below. You can see it from the side. It's very light, again, very transparent. And you can see here how nice it's going to be to walk on it. Right now, it's very uncomfortable to walk on it. So we'll have a 7-foot bike lane, which will allow bikers to pass each other. And then we'll have a 12-feet sidewalk. So that's basically almost 20 feet, which they never had in the past. So, once that opened, and that will be on both sides. So altogether, it's about 40 feet only dedicated to pedestrians and bikers. This is, some other views. And then this structure here is basically a trellis with the landscaping. And it creates like a space, similar to what was done at the North End parks, where you have a place where you can see. And the view is absolutely beautiful. And at those locations, we are going to have some panels and some history about what you can see. Because when you walk the Charlestown Bridge, for example, right now, the North Washington Street Bridge, you see the Second Bridge, but you don't know anything about the Second Bridge unless you read it on the book. So actually, in the bridge, we're going to have different explanations about the different things that you can see, like the Bunker Hill Monument, like the Costume House Tower, because the view is ideal. And you can see here how the two relate to each other. So all the vocabulary and all the geometry is very triangular and is very sharp. And some people think that it looks like, like a fish. And actually the people fish there. And you can see actually the bones of the fish when you are walking. So, that's one of the inspirations, I suppose. And you can see them together here. I think they keep each other good company. One is a very strong vehicular bridge, mainly the interstate, and the other one is a lighter bridge that is more oriented to pedestrians and bikers. And this one is in the preliminary design, and it should open, we hope, like 2021. So, that's the goal. Thank you very much.
Well, as I've said before in this class, we have different kinds of guests. We have some who are very much about talk entirely about the process. These are people like advertising people and stuff like that. But I love having guests like you who produce specific designs that are rich, and there's a lot to talk about. And I will want to get into bridge design and accompanying infrastructure design, because it seems like it's kind of a seamless world between the bridge and everything that's associated with it. But it's a very particular kind of thing at the intersection of urban design and engineering, it seems to me. We have a lot of engineers in the audience, and I'm sure that all of them have been exposed to bridges, if only as structures problems, in their education. But I think the first thing I'd like to ask you about is let's just start with the Zakim Bridge, because that's sort of the first one, not in this talk, but in your career. Cable stay. Now, there's a bunch of reasons why you would choose one structural type of bridge over another. And some of them are pragmatic, and some of them, I imagine, answer other questions. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about why that bridge looks the way it does.
Well, as you know, when I started to work on the project, we had the scheme Z, and there was not a long span. Basically, it was a highway going, over the river. Mm-hmm. And that was very controversial. A lot of people filed lawsuits, and it was very difficult time in the project. And that's when I started working on the project. And one of the things that happened is that Fred Salvucci, who was the Secretary of Transportation, he thought that we needed to give something back to the community. And I naively thought that why we don't try a cable stay structure. And he liked the idea. Mm. So he gave, but it wasn't the one that is there now. It was just the idea of doing a cable stay structure. But just doing that actually was quite different, because they never been one in Boston, and it was something that would be difficult to get approved, right, because you don't really need to have that big span. Right. The navigation channel is smaller, so the federal highway will need to pay a lot more. Mm-hmm. But that was an important decision, because somebody at the top decided they liked the idea of the cable stay. So once that was decided, then there was this long process where Christian Mann was brought as part of a review committee, and he also liked the idea of the cable stay. So it was an easy process, and then we collaborated together on that project. And I would have to say that any bridge that was going to be located there needed to have something on top, mm-hmm, because it's very narrow. The clearance is very low. Okay. So either you had to have 20 piers in the water, which right, nobody wants to do, to keep the span ratio small, right, or you had to have something on top. And it could have been like an arch, right, or a truss, or a cable stay, or a suspension bridge. Okay. For a while, it was thought that maybe we should do an arch, before the cable stay was decision, right, because there is many arches in Boston. You have the Longfellow for one thing, yeah, or the BU Bridge. But the bridge is going like...
a series of small...
Yes.
Well, the BU Bridge is a big one.
Yeah. And but the slope is going like this, because you have to go into the tunnel. Right. And the arch always looked very awkward to me, because it looked like it's sliding down. Yeah. When you do a cable stay, it's always proud, and then you're supporting from the top. Right. So I thought it looked more stable somehow, right, visually. And it does, because a lot of people actually don't know that you have a 5% slope. Right. From the distance, you don't see it. Right. So I would say those were the factors, something new, somebody on high position liked the idea. We had some constraints, mm-hmm, about the depth, and that's how the cable stay was decided.
Well, I guess what I was trying to tease out is one of the things we talk about in this class is defining the problem to be solved. And I think what's so interesting about bridge design is, at first blush, you might think, well, the problem is obvious. It's like, why did the chicken cross the road? The answer is to get to the other side, and that's why Boston has bridges in the locations that it does, is because hundreds of years ago, usually, a need was identified to make a crossing between Boston and the then distant land known as Cambridge, or other associated areas. And what we don't think about enough is the rhetorical, image-based aspect, because the bridges you showed, and I had no idea until reviewing your presentation that you were involved with so many of these bridges in Boston. I like a lot of Bostonians of our generation anyway, I was completely stunned that suddenly we were redoing all of our bridges at the same time after ignoring them for decades, centuries in some cases. So that's very exciting for those of us who are interested in this sort of thing. But it also does reveal how different the bridges are, and you can really tell the ones that were built in different eras. You know, it's interesting to hear that the Harvard Bridge or the Mass Ave Bridge is one of the oldest, or at least, but its current form, I'd be curious to know, it probably didn't always look like it does now.
No, the only thing that is left of that bridge from, I think it's 1891, is the piers, the granite piers. It used to be a swing, so in the center it used to open, it used to turn. But then when the dam and other things were done on the past, that we created other constraints, then it was decided to be fixed.
Right.
So now, now it's fixed. But if you look at the center of the bridge right now, you see the piers are slightly different. That's because that's where the swing used to be. And then in the 1980s, they wanted to make it a little bit wider. So they kept the piers and they changed the structure on top.
Right, I think I remember that.
And that's why you have those little arms where I'm going to put the blue lights.
Yes.
And those are supporting the sidewalks.
Yeah.
Because it used to be a lot narrower. But, it's always true. I mean, in my opinion, the bridges always should reflect the latest technology, because bridges are very heroic, very, you want to do always the big jump, from place to place. So if we have better technology, why don't use it?
Right.
So I don't believe, in the US, some people are afraid of doing new bridges,
Right.
which was the problem here in Boston too with the cable bridge. A lot of people were against it.
Yeah.
Because many new bridges are very ugly and very unattractive. And they separated communities and they became highways. And so people are afraid and they like the old bridges, But I think if you do a good design, using the best technology and the best calculation systems and the best materials is the way to go.
Right. Well, again, because Boston is a historic city, certainly by U.S. standards, even just in the mile of river that you're working on, and I don't think it's probably more than a mile, there are really different problems to be solved, it seems to me, from complete reconstruction in almost total historical detail. And by the way, for those of you, see, most people actually in here are not from Boston. How many people are from Boston in this class? See, look at that. Almost everybody's from somewhere else. So not all of you probably know, I don't know if you even know the Longfellow Bridge, but the Longfellow Bridge is the one that is the most under construction, I would say, right now.
Well, the towers are down. 2 of them are down.
Oh, are they completely taken apart?
Yeah, because they were tilting, so you cannot repair them in place. So all the granite has to come down, and then you have to build them back.
Wow. But they are really astonishing in terms of, what I would call their rhetoric. That is not only the structural choice of the bridge is actually pretty straightforward. It's steel arches underneath between piers, I think, isn't it? But the rhetorical aspect, and what I mean by rhetorical is that, and frankly, that which is not practically necessary. In other words, rhetoric is that which is applied. And when you talk about rhetoric in fiction or in anything, rhetorical means the application of that which is not practically necessary. But there's this rich narrative in these bridges. And maybe you want to just say a couple of things about, there's the tremendous carvings.
But they're supposed to be Viking ships.
Yeah, and there's a front and a back, isn't there?
Yes, and also they have the seals of Boston and Cambridge. And the towers, of course, they are not necessary, and actually you cannot go inside the towers. But they gave personality to the bridge, and I think that was important to do. And for example, in the Shaking Bridge, the upper part of the tower is not necessary either. When you put the last cable, you could have cut it. But we felt like it was important to put something about the past, and that's why we kind of took the form of the Bunker Hill Monument and put it on the top of the tower. And actually, when you see it together, I think it makes the bridge more slender because, you have a taller tower and, it looks better. But it was mainly done to pacify some of the historic agencies that there would be something historic about it. That was the reason.
Right now, today and yesterday and the day before, the annual convention of the Boston Society of Architects is taking place at the Convention Center, called ABX now, used to be called Build Boston. I spoke there yesterday. Some of my colleagues are speaking there today and also yesterday. But it's really interesting. The business about style and choices that we make about what things look like. Architects sometimes really don't want to talk about that because they think it's a kind of an internal thing and the public will just screw it up. I remember, like it was yesterday, the debates that went on around what your bridge looks like. In other words, the decision to add this sort of Bunker Hill monument. This is the top of the obelisk. We're talking about it in Charlestown, the Bunker Hill Monument. Well, mimicking the top of that on the top of the two vertical elements. What do you call them?
Pylons?
Pylons.
Towers?
Yeah. Okay. That was a real public conversation about history versus the future. And Boston is a city that, because it has a real history, it actually values it. And therefore, now the downside of that is that it's anxious about change. I think that is dramatically changing now, by the way. I don't mean to digress too much, but something that has gone understudied in this city is the impact that the bicentennial, before you guys were born, but in 1976 had on the culture of the city. It suddenly revitalized perhaps some needed turning back to the historic past, but it ended up having maybe a hangover that infected the next 30 or 40 years that we are just now overcoming. And as we enter the debate about whether or not we're going to try to host the Olympics here, I think there are interesting arguments to be made on both sides of that. I haven't come down one way or the other yet, but the idea that the Olympics could be another catalyst for changing the identity, the design identity of Boston in a way that I think your bridge played a big part in, is a part of that conversation.
Yeah, and it's amazing for me, for example, when I think about 20 years, years ago, there was a lot of opposition about a cable structure, but then all the new pedestrian bridges I'm doing, they're all very contemporary and very light, and they've been embraced. People really like them. So I think the second bridge kind of broke that mold, and then it opened all sorts of possibilities, at least in bridge design.
No, but it's also true in architecture. I mean, the obsession in the 80s and 90s with reproducing things that looked like they were done in the 1880s and 1890s in this city was pretty intense. And now it's not that way at all. I mean, some might argue we're seeing too many glass buildings now. But for my money, that's a good problem for us to have because for so long we wouldn't do it. But let's talk a little bit more about bridges and the variables that go into them. There's a bunch of things I want to ask about. I'm so glad that you're showing so many bridges that all of us can see. I mean, I realize they're not all done yet, but because by the way, obviously the North Washington Street Bridge, the other one is going to be completely eliminated in order for this to be built because this is not a renovation at all. This is a complete...
No, this one is a new structure. For 10 years there was the idea of renovating the North Washington Street Bridge, but too much time has passed and the structure is in very bad shape, and actually the piers are in very good condition. You can still cross it, so don't be afraid, but it's not going to last a lot longer.
Right.
And that bridge has
it looks like it.
Yeah, and that bridge has never been kind of in the hearts of Bostonians, and it's never been something that people love, like the Longfellow.
Right.
So it was not that difficult to decide to demolish it.
But this is a great point, and I'm so glad you mentioned that because, if we think, and college sometimes leads us to believe that all answers have discrete, correct, right, all questions have discrete, correct, right answers. This is a case where it's, you and I have been in this business for a long time, and yet exactly what makes the North Washington Street Bridge expendable in the cultural memory of Boston, and let's say, the bridge that they're doing on the JFK Street up by Harvard right now, which is
the Anderson Bridge.
The Anderson Bridge. The technical innards of it, I'm sure, are being completely reimagined, but it is going to look exactly like it looked before, as the bridge I cross all the time, the BU Bridge, does. And it's interesting how those two bridges nobody was going to propose a radically different look to the BU Bridge. No way. And yet it needed to be it was in terrible shape. It took, what, 4 years to redo.
Yep.
But North Washington Street, fine, we'll get rid of it. And now the upside of this dramatically different environment that's 40% bicycles and pedestrians seems like a real, you can see how in a public meeting that would be a pretty big on the plus side.
Of course, because since maybe 20 years ago, the bikers have increased a lot in Boston.
Yeah.
There is, there was always pedestrians, but there were not a lot of bicycles.
Right.
Now there is many more.
It's a huge thing.
And the North Washington Bridge has the Freedom Trail.
Yep.
So it has a lot of tourists and a lot of people are walking there all the time. So giving them enough space, is a nice thing to do. It's something that will work well. I'm very excited about putting plants on the bridge. Of course, there's going to be a maintenance issue, but we are trying to. Yeah, but we're trying to get a sponsor that will maintain it. Because other cities put plants on the bridges, but not in Boston.
Where? I've never seen that before.
Well, in Singapore, which of course they have better weather, but it's actually very nice to have plants on the tree, on the bridge, because it will create more like a park-like environment, and then when you are over water, it will feel very, very different. Yeah. And having that space separating the bikers and pedestrians, I think it's going to be nice to have a screen, with plants so you don't see the cars always in your face. Because that's what happened right now. It's, it's very polluted.
Yeah. So they'll have to be hardy trees, whatever.
Yes.
And I noticed that they're in planters so that
Yes.
if they need to be switched out, that can, because they can't get too big. There's a lot of things.
No. It's, I just hope that once they go in and people really like the plants, that people will take care of them, which sometimes happens.
Yeah. Well, there's so many things here. I want to get to another. There's one set of projects I had no idea was going on at all, and those are the ones by the Museum of Science. And those are typologically very different from all the other bridges, I would say, in that they are creating a movement pattern in the city that does not exist now, as opposed to repairing or replacing one that currently does exist. A lot of people who are not urban designers probably don't think about urban design in the foreground the way we do, but the idea, urban design as opposed to architecture is about the connections between things, not the things themselves. So bridges are interesting because they're both. They're both a designed thing, but they're very much part of a network, and it's so clear in those two bridges that you're doing to dramatically change the experience of that end of the Charles River. For anybody who ever runs on the Esplanade or jogs in that area, this is going to change your experience completely.
Well, it's also very confusing now because, if you're walking on the Boston side on the Esplanade, you keep walking and then you get to a point where you cannot walk anymore.
Right.
It's like it stops.
Right.
And then, you have to go around with the cars. And this will make you always be on the water side, which is, it'll be quite exciting.
No, I think
and the museum really, for the longest time, abandoned their frontage. They don't use it.
Well, it's because it came of age, the buildings came of age at a really anti-urban time. It's so much of urban design is an accident of history. Which era did your area get developed in? And unfortunately, that got developed in a really crappy urban design era.
And the view is amazing. They have this nice historic pavilion, which people didn't even know it exists.
Yeah.
I mean, you see it when you go in the duck tour.
Right.
But nobody's there ever.
Right. So I have a question that I'm sure a lot of people watching your presentation wanted to ask, and it's one about death-defying risk, and that is in the bridge that is going to rise, I assume to accommodate boat traffic.
Yes, and it's going to rise only when you have a taller
There'll be many boats that'll be able to go underneath.
Well, mainly I wanted the duck tours to go underneath.
Yeah.
So that's going to be accommodated because you have many of those.
Well, but the other, the bridge on what do they call the bridge that the Museum of Science is on?
The dam or the Galleria, the one that goes
Well,
to the Galleria?
there's a bridge that does still.
Oh, the Craigie Bridge.
Craigie
yes.
Bridge.
Yeah. So when the Craigie Bridge opened, of course, this one will open too, and the idea is that the same control tower will connect, see the both of them.
And that's for larger pleasure boats
Yes.
that are docked up in Newton or wherever.
Yes.
And so just out of curiosity, I'm assuming to minimize inconvenience to drivers, there are certain times of day that.
Yeah, like the Craigie Bridge, there
Yeah.
will be a schedule.
Okay.
They open pretty quickly, particularly the pedestrian bridge will not maybe take like 2 minutes.
But the death-defying question is this. I've got my headphones on. I'm cruising on my bike. I'm really making time. I'm really into it. Unbeknownst to me, the bridge has gone up. Do I fly into the water to my death?
No.
Or how does this?
No, usually you have 3 ways to stop you. There will be a light,
Okay.
which is going to turn red.
I'm in the groove.
Yeah,
I'm not
then
even looking.
there's going to be a loudspeaker that announces it's going to open.
Okay.
And then the operator will not open the bridge unless everybody is away.
Oh, there's a human
Yes.
there doing it. Oh,
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. I was just curious about that. 'Cause
Yeah.
In the little diagrammatic image, I thought, wow, that is,
And, and then you're going to have a gate too.
Yeah, okay. So at the very end, I would run into a gate.
Yes.
See,
Yeah.
the only reason I ask is it is different than the Craigie Bridge, where well, first of all, for vehicles, maybe for everybody, the bridge comes up, so I would run into the bridge, whereas this, one side comes up, but the other one doesn't.
Yep.
So presumably,
Yeah.
anyway, so it's interesting because we don't see that many. I don't know that I've ever seen a risable or
A single bascule.
single
Single bascule.
bascule.
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually it's a double bascule. Like
Right,
that.
right,
This one is
right.
a single one.
I see.
Um,
Okay.
And it's a system that is used, from many locations. But usually there's a big counterweight, which is very heavy. Like the Craigie Bridge has a counterweight.
Yes. In fact, those are great to see. There are several old moving bridges or rising bridges that don't work anymore or aren't in use anymore, but you can really, and Chicago has a ton of them.
Yes.
On the Chicago River.
Yeah, famous.
And, they are such beautiful industrial artifacts. The giant iron bridges with the enormous, usually poured concrete counterweight. I'm sure most of you have seen these things, but they're really stunning industrial ruins. And sometimes people want to landmark them.
And I really wanted to do a different system to open it. And that's, part of the innovation. And I proposed something similar in Maine. There is a place called the Gut Bridge. And it's an interesting story. The community was really against the design, similar to the Aiken Bridge.
They wanted a more historic one.
No, the DOT had proposed a really ugly movable bridge, really massive, and it's a really nice little town called South Bristol, Maine. So they wanted to make a new design. And they approached me and said, why you don't make us a new design? And I was like very reluctant because I say, if the Department of Transportation doesn't want to change the design, they will always find a reason why not to. They're going to say they have this problem and that problem and that problem, and you cannot do it. But they keep asking me, and finally they got the governor to agree to do a workshop with the DOT, and I said, okay, maybe there is a chance. So I agree, and then I showed them a new design, and they couldn't really find a mistake, so they decided to change the old bridge, and it's being built right now. And I wanted to do the same cylinders, but there was, they're very conservative in Maine, and they say they still wanted to do a counterweight. So that one is also a cable structure that will open, but that one has counterweights.
And that might be just, this is always the case with new designs for buildings too, that when it gets to the facilities management people, the people who will be charged not with standing on the dais accepting the praise for having had the foresight and vision to do it, but rather the people whose jobs will be tied to the successful maintenance and execution over decades. it's a different issue than simply citizen opposition to change. Sometimes the idea of stocking parts for different kinds of things, you can imagine if you
No,
were...
and a movable bridge is definitely complex,
Yeah.
And it gets a lot of wear and tear.
Yeah.
Has to open so many times,
Right.
and so...
Very expensive to replace.
Yeah, I mean, usually a movable bridge will cost about $2,000 per square foot or $2,500 per square foot. And a nice, for example, the fixed bridge on the Museum of Science, I would say that's about $1,200 per square foot, but the movable, it would be the double.
Huh, that's so interesting that that's the metric for pricing bridges is still the square foot as opposed to the linear foot, because obviously how wide it is matters a great deal too.
Yeah, and an innovative cable supported structure like, like the ones I show you is usually around $1,000 per square foot. And then from there, you can do to 800, 900.
So cable bridges are comparatively affordable compared to some of the things they compete with, or no? If I'm a Tea Party governor in Tennessee and I want the cheapest bridge I can possibly get, what kind of?
Well, then you have to do small spans.
Okay. So
And
lots of piers.
Yeah, and then you have to do systems that are prefabricated or that they have standardized. For example, the I-beams or the precast beams. Those are the cheapest.
Which they do on. There are some elegant ones of those, but they do them on U.S. interstate highways oftentimes.
Yes, because they are the cheapest, and then also the beams are standardized.
Yes.
So you cannot go to a cut. This is a simplification, though.
Right.
But you can decide, okay, I'm going to make, for this span, we have to have this depth.
Right.
And there's not a lot of thought
All you
put
have to do
into
with
it.
that is the abutments. At
Yeah, there's still some, you have to still think about something else. But it's not that you have to create a new structural system or a new way to support something.
Right. But that's very clarifying, because the problem to be solved is different. If I'm going down the highway, I drive to Montreal fairly often, so I'm familiar with the bridges, and most of them are exactly as you say. They're actually, when you think about it, and as a designer, when you pay attention to this sort of thing, some of those precast concrete, probably pretty affordable crossings of the interstate are way better than others. In other words, the same, there's real design, and when you get into scalable things that are going to be reproduced hundreds and hundreds of times, you can actually probably put some serious design thinking into.
But it's always in bridge design, it's always about scale and proportion. And even a simple structure like a precast I-beam, if it's well scaled and well proportioned, it will give you a different impression.
Right.
When things, usually there is two problems. Sometimes they look very heavy,
Right.
which in your eye looks that's not necessary.
Right.
Something is overdone.
Right.
That's a problem. Or if it's too light, which doesn't happen too much, that's also a problem, because then you feel like, how is that being supported?
Right.
So there has to be a balance, and it's intuitively that people react to bridges. That's interesting to me, because even if you don't know about the bridge at all,
Right.
there is a reaction. There is always a reaction.
But, I would say that if you think about like the standard interstate crossing, I'm talking about as you're passing through a small town and the main road, the state highway crosses over the interstate. Happens all the time. What those are really part of the landscape. They're part of the horizontal landscape that you're driving through. When you get to one that is a portal, an entry to something, you realize that the problem to be solved is suddenly rhetorical, as you were suggesting. And it's a given that the engineering has to work to be able to carry the loads that's a given. No matter what solution you choose, you got to do that. But the presence or absence of this rhetorical objective seems to me really meaningful and can help explain to folks why the bridges in their lives look the way they do.
And the other thing is, that is an interest to me is like, I'm working now in Cleveland. I'm doing actually 3 bridges in Cleveland. And they're all in the waterfront. And for the longest time, Cleveland was divorced from the waterfront. They had industrial areas.
Is one of them the one that collapsed, or that was in Minnesota?
No, that's in Minnesota.
Sorry.
And now they're trying to connect the downtown to the water. And, and we're doing different different bridges. And what's interesting to me is that, when you choose 3 types of bridges, let's say, that can cross in this location, what makes one better than the other? Sometimes it's the cost, which is always important. Sometimes one is much cheaper and it still looks good, then that will win. But sometimes it's something about the scale or the context or what is around it. For example, in Cleveland, we have the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, the IMP building.
Right.
And it's important to me how the bridge looks with the museum, because that's kind of their landmark. That's a lot of tourists come to Cleveland to see the Rock and Roll Museum. So it's cost, it's the context sometimes, and sometimes it's just the scale and proportion of the element in the place. So it's different factors, and those factors are not only engineering factors.
Right.
It's not only about, okay, we did all the calculations and then, and that's done. There has to be some understanding about urban design or, other factors.
Well, I think this is the first time I've seen the North Washington Street Bridge proposal. And I thought you were very clear about how, because of where this is and its proximity to the Zakim Bridge, that these really have to be understood
like a pair.
As a pair, and a foreground and a background maybe. Now, as it happens, the programming of the two is also different, so there's a kind of deeper logic for this difference. But I think that's really a great example of how, I can tell you that if they have, I don't know at what level of civil engineering at this university, I should ask Jerry Hajar, but at what stage they might do bridge design or at least have bridge design problems. I'm going to petition to interject some additional variables because helping young designers appreciate a synthetic process that has to solve more than one problem at a time. There's
It's just hard for a student, because a student in engineering would not be able to do a bridge until the very end.
I see.
Probably fourth,
or fifth year. Maybe.
Yeah, something like that. And then,
they've just mastered that.
Yeah, and they haven't really had any experience, and they haven't really been exposed to, to these other issues. A lot of them are just focusing, learning how to do a basic design. It's not like in the architecture school where, you are in second year, you start to do a museum and you start to do all sorts of things, because it's much more free and they don't have to worry about the calculations or worry about it's going to be supported or not. But I would think that, towards the end of the education of an engineer, it will be interesting for them to understand why a bridge looks this way or that way, and why one is better than the other, and also why people like this one or not that one. Because that will inform them, about how to start to think about it. And unfortunately, many people finish their education of engineering, and then they are put into these very complex projects, and they don't really have the tools to resolve it. And I feel, you study all these years, and you're supposed to know how to achieve this bridge, but you don't. Because it's not only the calculations. There has to be more.
Right. Well, let's talk for a second about something that I think everybody will be able to relate to. There are certain kinds of bridges that we used to build, and we don't, to my knowledge, build them anymore, and it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about why that is. So, for example, if you go up in, between Boston and New York, you'll see, and I think there's one of these on the Cape, if I'm not mistaken. And as a little bit of a precursor, there are so many variables in a bridge. There's the image of it, of course, but there's also a lot of very quantitative things. The span, shipping concerns, like what's under, what's going over the bridge, but every bit as important in many cases what's going under it.
The width.
The width of it, the material, seismic risk, and there's all kinds of things, I guess. But a kind of bridge that you used to see, and I don't think you see anymore, is a type of railroad bridge. And it's the type where it was a big river to cross, and big ships needed to go through this river, but you couldn't, maybe they couldn't afford, or maybe it wasn't technically possible to have a span that was high enough to clear that, because it would have been so much civil engineering to get the track up to that height over all the miles in both directions. So they had a section of the bridge, usually is a truss all the way around, very sturdy, that would rise up. So there would be two pylons only in the center of this long span bridge.
Yeah, the vertical lift.
Vertical lift bridge. We don't do those anymore, do we?
Actually, there are some in Massachusetts being done. They just finished one in Chelsea.
Okay.
The new Chelsea bridge is a vertical lift structure. And there's going to be one in the Fall River between Quincy and Weymouth, I think.
And they're always for railroad, right?
No, these are highway. These are cars. Vertical lift bridges, they are liked by a lot of engineers because it's a very sturdy structure, and the movement is just going in this direction.
Right.
The one in the Fall River, I was involved in it, and it's not the bridge I like the best. And the community wanted to do a bascule, but because of the span, there was a lot of reluctance to do a bascule. There is a limitation about that too, depending on the type of bridge. And they went to a vertical lift bridge, and there used to be a bascule there.
I see.
So the people wanted, let's do what we had before.
Right.
But it was not possible to do that, so they did the vertical lift bridge.
Are they very expensive?
Yes. Yeah, that one is about $350 million. The community was really against it. And I always feel like sometimes the community should, if you can keep fighting until the end, okay? But then you might not get anything. But if you try to work with the Department of Transportation, you might be able to get it to a middle ground and get, some things that you might want to have.
Right.
In this case, they keep fighting. So, the design is not as good as it could be. And I think it's because they were never willing to compromise.
Right.
It was either the bascule bridge or nothing.
Right.
But there's a nice one in the Cape.
Yeah, that's the one I'm thinking of.
Yeah. Actually, that one has an architect involved in the, I think it's somewhere beginning of the century.
Yeah.
And he did the tops, the little top.
Now, what is the vertical lift bridge what kind of problem does it solve? Is it the one I described where you're crossing waterway with very large ships and you just can't make the whole bridge that high? Okay.
Yeah. That's and then usually there is a truss that is the main span, and that rises it up, and it has to have the counterweights, and then it go up.
Man. And so much maintenance. God, I would think.
Yes, there is. But all the mobile bridges need maintenance.
Yeah.
They need to be clean. You cannot let it rust, and the motor has to work. And, so they open. So yeah, they are high maintenance.
So now help me understand. I mean, I think I sort of know, but as we said, your projects span from completely new bridges, at least maybe the footing, maybe the piers, those are always kept if possible, right? Because that's a really expensive part of bridge making, is the part that's under the water. And we've done that quite well over the years. Now, some of these things had really good foundations, and the shape of the piers is very carefully done so that they don't get back pressure and all that. But sometimes, so we go from complete historic recreations, like at the Longfellow Bridge, to, let's say, something at the other end of the spectrum, which is the new Tappan Zee Bridge down outside New York. How many people are familiar with the Tappan Zee Bridge? Yeah? If you drive on the East Coast, you've probably been over it. It's a really long span, right?
Yes.
Like more than a mile, maybe?
I don't remember the
it's an extremely long span.
Yeah, it's quite long.
And it goes over a portion of Long Island Sound or something, I think. And they're completely replacing it.
Yes.
Right? In a way, a project that big, that's the only way to do it, because you have to keep the existing bridge functioning for the several years it takes to build the other?
Repairing a historic bridge is very expensive, and there is a lot of risk, because until you start opening everything inside, you don't know exactly how. It's like renovating a house, historic house, I suppose.
Right.
So a lot of agencies just want to do a new bridge,
Right.
Because then they guarantee that it's going to last 100 years,
and it'll cost this much.
Yeah, and then there is not a lot of maintenance at the beginning, which they like.
Right.
So I think unless the bridge is protected or people really like the bridge, they tend to do new bridges.
Okay.
Because actually they're probably cheaper.
Who is designing the Tappan Zee Bridge, do you know?
Well, the Tappan Zee Bridge was a design-build project.
Okay.
And I think the main engineering company is called HDR.
Oh, yeah, sure. Oh, yeah. They also have architecture, HDR.
Yes.
But it's probably the biggest bridge project in the United States. I think it's like over $2 billion, maybe more than $3 billion.
Expensive. It's pretty expensive.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's just interesting to me that we don't foreground in our culture. I don't think we don't foreground conversations about the preservation or restoration or replacement of infrastructure the way we do with buildings. Ever since we tore down historic Penn Station in New York City in the early 60s, we have been very much more self-conscious about the preservation or restoration or renovation or rehabilitation of architecture. And we're less conscious as a culture about doing it with infrastructure, it seems to me.
Well, yes, but some bridges are protected. And the Longfellow is protected.
Yes.
And the Harbor Bridge also. I mean, the Mass Avenue Bridge is protected. So whatever we were proposing had to be approved by the historic agencies, and it was quite involved because they are very protective. They don't want to change anything.
Right.
So I think the lighting, they like changing the lighting because there was no lighting.
Right.
But if you try to change something that was there, it's a lot of reluctance to change something that was already there.
A quick question about, we're going to open this up to questions from our students in just a minute, but a quick question about private funding of the lighting on the Harvard Bridge. I'm curious, this is a bit more of a policy or even political question. We often applaud when, wow, that's great, a private person has decided to do something that maybe we should have done as a city or a state or a country. And isn't it great that the Harvard Bridge is now going to look cooler and be a much more interesting experience? I think it's very clear that will be the case. I do think that I don't fully get the dynamic aspect of the Smoots lighting thing, but I'll look forward to seeing it when it happens.
Well, it's like, do you remember the Matrix movie, how the lights start to turn on like that?
Yes,
so
yes.
That.
I see, okay.
So they turn on in order.
But won't they also turn off in order? So,
yes.
So
yes.
It'll be dumb luck if I happen to be going in a way where the lights are following me, but I could equally have the luck that somebody keeps turning out the light in my room.
Yeah, well, it's only happen, at the beginning and at the end.
Okay. It's my job to find.
And although maybe I might use it, might hack it and it start to go.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's supposed to only happen at the beginning and at the end.
But it's an interesting thing about the private funding, because I think we need to be careful when on the one hand, we should thank this anonymous person and applaud their generosity, but also be anxious about our unwillingness to pay for infrastructure in general.
This funding will be given to the Charles River Conservancy, which is this non-for-profit that works on the river. And what the Conservancy did is that they did a competition.
I see.
And then they invited different people to send submissions for the lighting, and then they choose one design.
I see.
So there was some kind of
there was some
process,
and
public, not public participation, but some kind of process to make the selection. And then, of course, the bridge is not owned by the private person; it's owned by the Department of Transportation.
Right.
So they had to agree to it too.
Right.
And they don't have a mechanism to accept money that much money, because nobody gives them that much money. So the agreement is that everything is going to be built not through them. It's going to be done, through this private enterprise and the conservancy.
Right.
And then when the bridge is completely finished, it will be turned back to them.
I see. Interesting.
But they didn't have a way to get the money. So.
The Department of Transportation did not have a way. Oh,
No.
That's interesting.
No.
I mean, maybe that's a good thing. I don't know. I'll have to.
Well, they were worried because they didn't want to set a precedent.
Yeah.
And also if you accept money from somebody, you have to accept from somebody else.
Yeah.
You had to have, they wanted to say, okay, we have to do an RFP, and it was getting very complicated, and it was very obvious that they don't have really a way to accept that funding.
Right. So how long do you think that this, I mean, I wish the rest of the country were doing what Massachusetts is doing and revitalizing so much civic infrastructure at the same time. And I really didn't realize so much of this was going on, and how much money it must be. My gosh, well, those 7 bridges is got to be billions when you put it all together, no?
Maybe not billions, but quite a lot.
Many hundred millions,
yes,
surely.
Yeah. I mean, just the Longfellow is about 300 million.
Yeah, okay, all right. Well, it's good. It's an investment in stuff that lasts a long time.
And it was very much needed. The river was really,
it's true.
Were abandoned.
And
the last time they did something in the Longfellow was 1950, I think.
And for the economists out there, it's hard to imagine a better time than the last 5 years to borrow money to build things because interest rates have never been lower. They're about to go up.
It's like interesting because in the U.S., there's a lot of tendency to say, okay, let's not pay more taxes and all of those ideas. But then if you don't have money, then you cannot repair anything. Right, and then if there is no funding for the MBTA, then the trains cannot be changed. And so and a lot of people have to get in the idea that if it's a public enterprise, the only way to support it is with the taxes. There's other ways. I mean, now some other countries they do private-public, and that's happening now in the U.S. They're trying to have companies come and take over a highway or take over a bridge, and then they pay for it, but then they get the tolls, to repay it back.
Right. Well, Kate, do we have any questions? And if anybody wants to come up to the mics, please feel free.
Is it confusing being both engineer and architect? How do you manage both different ways of thinking at the same time? And how do you decide on the goals you want to achieve when renovating a bridge?
Well, I kind of became a blend now, and I don't see myself as one or the other anymore. And for the long time, I was a little worried about how I was going to be perceived. Because you have the architects and you have the engineers, and then not many people are working on the 2 fields at the same time. But I don't worry about it anymore. I think it's like if you have a good design idea and you understand the engineering part of it, it could work. So I don't separate it anymore. And one thing that I did is that I started to hire engineers to work in my office some years back, and that really helped because it makes it more balanced. And now, for example, when we do a preliminary design, we all do the calculations completely now, which actually is better. Because then, when I go and explain something, because many times we have to collaborate with a local company, with local engineering company, because I don't have licenses in the whole US, if you have the calculations and you show them the structural report, they feel much comfortable. So I think it's a blend. And I think that really, if you see in the history of bridge design, the great bridge designers, they always were a little bit like an architect. They always had imagination. They always had a sensitivity to the context. They always understood proportion. Right. So actually, it's hard to separate it. And that's why I feel like so many bridges are very unattractive, because there is no balance. There is no thought process. And one thing that is interesting to me is like the cost. For example, if I was just thinking as an architect, I would say, okay, this is the most beautiful bridge, so we have to pay for it no matter what. That's the biggest priority. But I don't think that way. Actually, for me, if I can find a beautiful bridge that is reasonable in the cost, I feel very proud. Because I think that's where the art of bridge design is. You have to be able to make something that is beautiful, but it has to be functional, it has to be cost effective, it has to be reasonable. And if you can do both, then you have a big success. Because, it's always easy to make a beautiful bridge that is very expensive.
Right.
I mean, that can be done. And there is actually some that are really ugly and really expensive too. So it's like, that's the worst. And of course we have the ones that are cheap and ugly, which are, but to find the middle ground, I think that's something that I strive to do very much. And, and that's more like the engineering inside me thinking about that.
That reminds me of one question I really did intend to ask you, which is, of bridges, of the people designing bridges in the world today, who do you most admire? And or what is your favorite bridge in the world?
Well, of course, I admire engineers because, because I would like to be somebody that can do that can work on the engineering, but also have a beautiful structure. And, Christian Mann had a huge influence in my career. And he's retired now.
Yes.
But there is another engineer in Germany that we have worked together called Georg Sleig, that also is very innovative and very creative. And
what do you think of Santiago Calatrava, for example?
well, Santiago Calatrava is a very talented person, and I think he has an excellent sense of proportion and scale.
Yeah.
One of the issues with him is he doesn't care about the cost.
Right.
And to me, that's a little bit problematic because I feel like it becomes too extreme.
Yeah.
And there is no restraint, And I think like sometimes his bridges are very beautiful, but they're also very monumental and very imposing.
That's always, the answer is always monumental.
Yes.
Maybe.
And always more important than anything else.
Yeah.
And I don't see that. I think it's better to work with what you have. For example, this bridge. I'm sure Santiago Calatrava wouldn't have designed a bridge like that. He would have done a big tower and a big arch, or something that will be almost in competition with the Seikin Bridge.
Sure.
Because we wanted to make as much attention as possible.
Right.
But one thing that he deserves enormous credit is to bring visual quality to bridges. Before him, that was not very clear, and he was able to say, okay, we can do beautiful bridges. We can do
even in the U.S.
Yeah, even in the U.S. So that he deserves a lot of credit for pushing, for that. So for that part, I do admire him. I think that he was very innovative, coming with that idea.
Yeah. Kate, shall we just have one more?
Do you think future bridges will be based on the North Washington Street Bridge due to its accommodation of pedestrians?
Well, it'd be nice if they do that. But in the North Washington Street Bridge, we have luck because the middle lanes were closed for the longest time. That's where the train used to go. And those lanes have been closed, 20 years. And that's why you see the orange barrels there. So that space had been closed. So it was not so difficult to say, okay, let's take that space that is not being used, let's put it on the sides. But if
you had to reduce traffic flow, it's a much harder fight.
And that was happening in the Longfellow. For example, there was the idea to only put one lane in each direction. Right. But there is a lot of cars coming into Boston for some reason, especially in the afternoons.
I know that you're right about that, by the way, and it's bizarre that the traffic is much greater coming into Boston and much lighter coming out the other way. I don't know what happens to all these people once they get into Boston.
Maybe they take a different route.
They become altered forever and they can't find their way home.
And that's why, one side going to Cambridge is going to be one lane. But it was, that was a difficult decision because a lot of people wanted to do wide sidewalks like the North Washington Street Bridge, but they couldn't get them. They also wanted cycle tracks, which they couldn't get them either. But they're going to get them here. So
I know through my friend Tony Pangaro, who I think has been very involved in the public process on that bridge. Anyway, Miguel, I want to thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was interesting. Thank you.